Krishna. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Shimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Sarasvati Deve Gauravani Prachardane Nivashesa Sunyavadi Pashtita De Shatarane. Firstly, I'd like to thank the SPT team for inviting me and asking me to say a few words in glorification of Srila Prabhupada. So thank you very much for that opportunity. In 1982, I attended my first Sunday feast, which happened to be at Bhaktivedanta Manor in London. And the first part of the feast, they were showing a video. It was in the theatre room of Bhaktivedanta Manor. I'm sure many of you know it. So I found myself going in, and instinctively I went to the back of the room, which turned out to be a good thing for me. So I'm sitting down, and of course, you know, first Sunday feast, first real experience, and certainly my first experience of Srila Prabhupada, because the video that they were showing was Your Ever Well-Wisher. So I'm sitting at the back, watching that video, and then I feel myself at various stages throughout it welling up and crying, basically. Personally, I'd never found myself in that situation before, except once. As a kid, some years before that, I remember watching an old black and white movie, and it was about a lady who had been diagnosed with some terminal illness, and she only had a matter of months to live. And I'm sitting there watching it, and what she does is, for the last months and weeks and days of her life, she is just focused, completely focused on finding good families that her children can be adopted by, because her husband and the father of the children just happens to be an alcoholic, so she can't trust him to do the needful, if you like, and to look after their children. And I just remember when I was watching that, and it was in, I think it was in some kind of, around Christmas time, some sort of family situation. And again, as a kind of, you know, tough boy, you know, I didn't want to be showing my emotions, but I couldn't help it. I just was welling up. So this was really only the second time that I'd experienced this kind of welling up of emotions. And it was watching this video of Srila Prabhupada. And that's why I was kind of happy that I had gone to the back, because you know, as long as you don't make noise when you're crying, you know, you can kind of get away with it. No one needs to see you. Now, why was I welling up? Sometimes these things are imperceptible, really, and it's hard to know exactly, you know, the reasons why things happen at certain times. But I do remember that before we saw Srila Prabhupada, in fact, as far as I can remember, it's around about 20 minutes before Srila Prabhupada speaks on that Your Ever Well-Wisher video. But prior to that, in the lead up to that, I remember hearing other people speak of him. And the person who really kind of impressed me the most and really captivated me and really sucked me into the whole experience, if you like, of this video and Srila Prabhupada and what he had done, was Sally Agarwal, the lady who was married to the Indian doctor, American lady who was married to the Indian doctor, where Srila Prabhupada first went for a month or so when he first arrived, just I guess just to, you know, sort of get his bearings, if you like, and get himself sorted. So she was speaking, and I just thought she was quite amazing. You know, she was saying such things as that Srila Prabhupada was so kind and sensitive, and she says actually he was one of the most unusual people that I'd ever met. Now, she meant unusual in a very, very super positive way. Like unique and special and a one-off, if you like. But it was just interesting. She said, you know, the way that she kind of expressed it. But anyway, she just said that he was the most unusual man that I'd ever met. And then she said, when he laughed, he was oceanic. He just seemed to take in the whole universe when he actually laughed. So she was really appreciating Prabhupada's I guess, his inner, joy and his inner happiness, that would just exude and manifest in certain situations, and particularly when he laughed. And she said actually the month that Prabhupada stayed with the family, it was the most enjoyable time of her entire life. And she also mentions one of those times when Prabhupada is laughing, and you may have seen the picture. It's when her young son, Bridge, is taking his first steps. And of course, being a Grihasta myself, a granddad now as well, they're kind of interesting and kind of exciting times. Of course, you're connected to the family. In this case, Srila Prabhupada, he wasn't. But she just said when he saw that, his eyes lit up and his smile was oceanic. And later on, I would come to realize that kind of, Sally's descriptions of Srila Prabhupada, they were kind of a person who simultaneously was completely detached, completely free from any attachment, but at the same time was also completely free of any aversion, any semblance of attachment, any semblance of aversion. And he was simply, 100%. Everything that he was doing and experiencing and all of that, it was 100% in the context of his consciousness of Lord Krishna, basically being supremely Krishna conscious. So then in this video, the first moving picture that you see of Srila Prabhupada, which is shortly after Sally speaks, but the first moving picture you see of him, you see him sitting and chanting, surrounded by many, many people. Most of them what we would affectionately refer to as hippies, but others as well. I remember seeing there's one fairly elderly lady actually, and she's dressed in a headscarf, very similar to the ones that my mum used to wear. And, she's really intrigued by it all. In fact, it's quite interesting because Srila Prabhupada in that sense is all on his own. Of course, it's a nice atmosphere he's in, he's chanting and people are, engaging like that. But still, he's all on his own essentially. But he's totally unfazed by it all, looking super resplendent as he's sitting there chanting Hare Krishna. And the audience, on the other hand, it kind of in equal measure, they're a combination of nonplussed and just fascinated by the whole experience. And obviously, it's an experience that they've never had before. So that was my first sighting of Prabhupada, if you like, in a moving picture. And it was incredible. And as I say, as Sally had already spoken so wonderfully, and then seeing Prabhupada chanting, etc., that was just, I was just totally hooked now. There was nothing that was shifting me from my seat. I was just totally captivated like that. But then as the video progressed, it just kind of got better and better. Within, a minute or so of that chanting, where Prabhupada was chanting surrounded by all those personalities, he then actually speaks. And in that sense, this is the first time that I'm ever experiencing Srila Prabhupada speaking. And then what does he speak? It was just quite an incredible thing. To my absolute amazement, I was just convinced, and even to this day I still am. At the time, because I couldn't put it in context, it almost was kind of freaking me out, if you like, because it just seemed that Prabhupada was speaking directly to me, and I was thinking, how can this be the case? So at the very beginning of his speaking, he kind of just encapsulated precisely what his mission was, if you like, and I think just as few as 14 words or something, where he says, my mission is to preach the philosophy of Lord Chaitanya and chant Hare Krishna. Later on, I also reflected on that Srila Prabhupada was so precise and so specific. He actually didn't even mention Krishna. He mentioned Lord Chaitanya because that was his specific mission. So it was quite interesting. Prabhupada was very precise, very specific. And of course, we can learn from that. We've all heard the phrase mission drift, that we have to be careful that we don't drift from Srila Prabhupada's, very tight and very clear mission of what he came for. But then he started speaking, and the words that he spoke, as I say, they just seemed to be directed at me. That's certainly how I perceived it. And he said, that this transcendental vibration of the Hare Krishna mantra, it will cleanse the dirty things of the mind. And Lord Chaitanya will show us how to become free of all anxiety. Again, he mentions Lord Chaitanya. So it will cleanse the dirty things of the mind. and it will help us to become free of attachment. So I'm sitting there listening to this, and the reason that those words resonated with me so much, actually, so very, very closely, the reason that happened was that my first relationship, basically, certainly my first serious relationship, but essentially my first relationship had just come to an end because my girlfriend had told me that, life was too short for monogamous relationships. In other words, a very philosophical way of justifying that you're quote unquote cheating like that. So this was devastating to me. I guess from my girlfriend's point of view, in the context of Prabhupada's words, she was pretty dirty having that view. But my mind, it was doing somersaults due to my attachment to her. And consequently, I was really full of anxiety. It's quite amazing. So that was the reason, really, that I went to the Sunday feast in the first place, because I'd had some minor contact with devotees prior to that, and I kind of was basically taking shelter because of this development with, as I say, my first serious girlfriend. So that's the reason I went. So then I go. I'm watching this video, Your Ever Well-Wisher, and then Prabhupada talks exactly on that point about the dirty things in the heart and the mind and how to become free from anxiety. I mean, to this day, I feel a little embarrassed talking about this because it sounds quite arrogant, I guess, of me, thinking that I was getting some, special intelligent attention from such an incredible personality. And Prabhupada, I mean, there is just no more, sort of 40 odd years later, there's just no more special person that has ever existed. So such a special personality. So I'm feeling a little embarrassed, because why would he single me out to be for attention like that? And by the way, in terms of our own understanding of Srila Prabhupada's uniqueness, it's fully supported by Shastra, if you like, and by other incredible personalities. So, Srimati Radharani, for instance, in a conversation with Narada Muni many thousands of years ago, she quoted Idam Stanam Parityajya Videsham Gamyate Maya, which is basically saying that, she's saying to Narada, the conversation took place in Vrindavan, I will leave this place, Vrindavan, and I will travel to faraway lands to preach the glories of Srimad Bhagavatam. Now, if we analyze that, I will leave this place, Vrindavan. Where did Prabhupada leave from? He left from Vrindavan. I will go to faraway lands. There is no further away land from India on this planet than the United States of America. And I will preach the glories of Bhagavatam. When Srila Prabhupada left India, aside from a few incidentals, a few rupees, etc., some grain that he brought, obviously for sustenance, and a change of clothes. I think he brought an umbrella, which was obviously a good idea for the east coast of America. But aside from all those incidental things that Prabhupada took with him, the only thing, if you like, of significance was that he brought Srimad Bhagavatams. So it's quite amazing. He left from Vrindavan, he travelled to a faraway land, and he preached the glories of Bhagavatam. So this was coming from none other than Bhakti Devi or Srimati Radharani. And then, of course, we have, Bhaktivinoda Thakur in 1885. So 1885 to 1985 is 100 years. So, sort of 100 years or so before Prabhupada came to the West, saying that very soon the unparalleled Harinam Sankirtan will be propagated all over the world. It had never happened before in the history of Krishna consciousness, in the history of Vaishnavism. That had never happened before. And here Bhaktivinoda Thakur was predicting that very soon, and of course in the eyes of eternity, 100 years is absolutely nothing. So very soon this will actually happen. And when those fair-skinned people will also then come to India and chant Jai Sachinandan with their Bengali brothers and sisters. And that's exactly what happened. First Prabhupada went to the West, and then devotees were attracted to him, and then they were chanting Hare Krishna on the streets of Paris and London and New York and all of these different countries. And then those devotees then went back to India with Srila Prabhupada, and then they were chanting in places like Calcutta and of course Mayapur and Vrindavan, etc. They were chanting with their Bengal, Bhaktivinoda Thakur references Bengalis, but just Indian devotees in general. So just within less than a century of Bhaktivinoda Thakur making that prediction, it all came to pass. So notwithstanding all of that, here am I sitting in the theatre room of Bhaktivedanta Manor, and Prabhupada he's speaking to me. It was just incredible. I think a kind of a bond from my side at least, and hopefully from Srila Prabhupada's side, but you know, from my side, a bond really was formed then, that I just basically, in that sense, fell in love with Srila Prabhupada. You know, and as Sally Agarwal had said, he's so kind and so considerate. Here he was, manifesting that kindness and that consideration by speaking directly to me. So, yeah, I just, you know, from that point of view, will be eternally grateful, you know, indebted, and will never forget and be eternally grateful for that mercy that Srila Prabhupada bestowed on me at our very first meeting, you know, via that Your Ever Well-Wisher video. So that, if you like, is my kind of personal legacy, for want of a better way of putting it. But of course, Srila Prabhupada has many legacies. And I'd like to highlight 3 of them. And I'll do them in reverse order, if you like, the third first. So the third legacy of Srila Prabhupada. And, you know, perhaps some will find, you know, why is this one not higher? But of course, you can only kind of evaluate whether something should be higher and lower when you get the full picture. So when you see the 3, you'll see why this one is only in 3rd spot. But the one that I would put 3rd in terms of his legacy is his ISKCON, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. What a wonderful vehicle for humanity. And, you know, Prabhupada started that in 1966 when he registered ISKCON in New York. And now here we are, however many years later, more than half a century later, and ISKCON's still here, and it's still going strong. Yes, of course, there's many, you know, challenges that we have to face and issues that we have to deal with, but essentially it's still going really strong. From the first centre that Prabhupada established on 26 2nd Avenue, now we have, how many around the world, you know, well into 4 figures, I think, at this stage. So, you know, ISKCON continues to grow and expand, and it's an incredible legacy of Srila Prabhupada. But as I say, I would put that as his 3rd legacy. The second legacy of Srila Prabhupada, and again, people will probably find this, why is this not number 1? But anyway, second legacy, his books. His books, just what an incredible, I mean, all of the things that Srila Prabhupada did, you know, first off traveling to the West, you know, attracting so many devotees to his movement, establishing so many temples, so many farm communities, so many restaurants, gurukuls, you know, then he had all this scientific preaching that was going on, and, you know, starting Spiritual Sky Incense as an example, so many things that Srila Prabhupada did. And all the while that he was doing that, every single day he's rising at like 2 o'clock in the morning or whatever time it was. And what's he doing? He's translating Srimad Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Charitamrita, etc. Just incredible. The whole thing is just absolutely incredible. So yeah, his books are just, you know, an extraordinary legacy. But what I would put number 1 as Srila Prabhupada's legacy would be his extraordinary personal example, exemplary example as an acharya. And the reason that I would put that number 1, first, you know, in many ways it's the thing that people will connect with when they would meet Srila Prabhupada, either in person or now through videos or through talks or through his books, etc. It's the first thing that really strikes you, that this person is walking the walk. They are not talking the talk, they're walking the walk every inch of the way. So that's one thing. And the second thing I would say is that without that incredible example that Prabhupada gave us, his personal example as an acharya, then arguably the other legacies wouldn't exist, because if Prabhupada wasn't an acharya, wasn't, as I say, walking the walk like that and giving us a perfect example, people wouldn't necessarily have followed him. And if they hadn't have followed him, then he wouldn't have been able to do all the other incredible things that he did, like the establishment of ISKCON, etc. So for that reason, I kind of think that Prabhupada's personal example, would be his greatest legacy for me personally. So thank you, Srila Prabhupada. Thank you so much for being such an incredible, wonderful, exemplary example of a devotee, of an acharya. And as a result of that, and seeing you in that Your Ever Well-Wisher video all those years ago, all those decades ago, no matter how hard I try now not to follow you, I find it impossible. That moment in 1982, I became hooked to you at that very moment. And that hook, thankfully, even though from a sense gratification point of view, sometimes you resist, but thankfully that hook has just gone deeper and deeper into my heart. And I hope and pray that that's the way it will remain, not just for this lifetime, but forever. Thank you so much, Srila Prabhupada. And may I ever be your eternal servant. Praghosa Das. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.